To talk through their stories of music, Siddhartha is joined by This Is Us cast member, fellow musician, and Emmy nominated Chris Sullivan, who many may know as Toby. Welcome to the ASCAP experience.
Thank you, Crystal. Hi, Chris.
Hey, how are you, Crystal? Thank you very much. Uh, Sid, welcome to the ASCAP experience.
Thanks, Sully. Well, welcome to the ASCAP family.
You've just you've just entered it. Um, we've been catching up. We've been catching up pre-roll, so it's always fun to pretend like we've just encountered each other.
I know it's so good to see you. I will say I miss hanging out with you. I
Yeah.
just saw you recently though.
Yeah,
You were in my studio.
that's right. That's right. We recorded a track together for the possibility of sending it Dan Fogelman's way.
That's right. I mean, I was blown away. You wrote this song called Messiah Moon,
Mhm.
and you and Taylor Goldsmith came over and recorded it. That was so much fun.
Yeah, you and Taylor have been great inspirations to me. I was just I texted you a couple days ago. I was out in the desert and I'm putting together a playlist for our baby who is due in about a month, and the playlist is just littered with Siddhartha Khosla music and Taylor Goldsmith music. And I was listening to a couple of your songs from your band Goldspot.
Well, that's very, very kind of you. You're one of the few people that actually still listens to Goldspot. I'm very honored.
First of all, if you're not listening to Goldspot, go get the records. They're excellent.
Very sweet, Chris. No, that made my day. I was like, oh, that's so nice that he's, listening to some of my music as he's is getting ready to bring his little one into the world. That's a huge honor. So thanks, man.
Well, I part of the thing that I mean, obviously we are connected by This Is Us, but one of the things about your music that people, whenever they hear music and they're trying to explain it to someone, they're like, oh, it's kind of like, if I was going to explain Taylor's music, it's kind of Jackson Brown meets the band, and you always pull these other musical influences in, and your music and your band is the only band I've ever been able to say, I don't know, it's kind of like the Beatles.
I can't even accept that.
Yeah, no, but it's one of those things where it's like the influences that you take in your songwriting and all of the music that you make are so beautifully made your own. But I'm dead serious. It's the way I describe Goldspot to people.
I'm honored by that. That means a lot. Thank you.
How did you go from songwriting into composition for film and television? What was that transition?
I mean, I spent my musical life before composing for film and television in bands. That's kind of where I learned everything. Um, I had a band in high school called the Hip Hop Hindus, and
Nice.
we were a cover band. We did all
Tell
sorts
me there are recordings. Tell me there are recordings.
there are live recordings that I will have to share with you at some point.
Please do.
There's even recordings of me rapping. I rapped. We did a cover of Us Three, and I rapped.
Excellent.
I will only do that. I will only do that if I'm severely inebriated or if I'm trying to amuse my kids. That's about it. So those are the two times the rapping comes out. But so we had this band in high school, and then after college, I had a band called Goldspot that really sort of like started my musical career for me. And There's a radio station in Los Angeles called KCRW, and my dream was to get played on KCRW by a DJ named Nick Harcourt. I looked at Nick as the arbiter of cool. He was always playing the bands that I kind of aspired to be like. He was the first DJ to play um, Coldplay. He played Radiohead. He played all these wonderful bands, and he was like the first to actually do all this in the U.S. So when he played our band, it really started everything for me. It was a dream come true. And there were producers and directors that heard my music, and my songs would get placed in TV and film and shows like How I Met Your Mother or The OC. That's kind of what started. I started my getting my feet wet in film and television by having my songs placed in those shows, and then ultimately Dan Fogelman, who you know very very well.
Yes. And
He's our
you went
boss.
to school with.
Yes, Dan and I went to Penn together, and we were roommates. And Dan called me one day to compose the music for his television show called The Neighbors on ABC. Uh, 5, 6 years ago. He called me to come in as the season 2 composer. They were making a change going into season 2. He called me, and I said, I don't think I can do this.
That was going to be my questions. Like, how did you like? What at what point did you go, you know what? Let me take a crack at this. And what were the first steps in doing that?
Well, the honest answer is that my band career had hit a ceiling, I think. At the time I didn't want to admit it. But looking back, I believe that that's kind of, everyone around me, from my manager to my Amy was my fiance at the time. I think she was my fiance at the time, or we were about to get married. Oh no, she was, let's see, at that time 13. Oh, we were married at that point. So she and Steve, both my manager, both encouraged me to kind of take the job, and I was reluctant because I didn't know, honestly, if I could do it. I was so used to writing songs, and writing songs that were reflective of my own personal experiences. I'd never really written to picture. I'd done maybe like a Target commercial at one point. Um, that's my kind of holiday. That was the little jingle. Oh, that's anyway. That was it. It was a holiday Christmas ad. And so I had minimal experience doing this, but I also knew that I needed to find a way to survive as a musician, and make a living as a musician, and so all those considerations, came
Yeah.
into play, and I was nervous about whether I could do the job or not.
So when I first started writing songs on the guitar, I would say to myself, all right, if I was going to write a song for John Prine, what would that sound like? If I was going to write a song for Tom Waits, what would that sound like? And I kind of took these influences and actually used their songs to teach myself how to write songs, how the format of songs, the structure of songs, the possibilities. Were there other composers that you kind of I mean, I would have imagined you all right, I got to compose a TV show. Let me start listening to TV compositions and figure out what those look like. What was that? Where did you get your inspiration? Where did you get your structures from? How did that work?
Well, I think for me, so much of my musical vernacular, or however you want to describe it, it really comes from my childhood in India. And my parents came to this country in the late '70s. I was born, and they lived the kind of quintessential immigrant experience here, and which meant basically that they came here with very little money. They came here with $8 to their name. I was born. They had to find a way to kind of work, go to school, and take care of me, and
Mhm.
and in that process realized that sending me back to India to be raised by my grandparents for a short period of time until my parents were ready to bring me back was was our path forward. That was the way we were going to proceed as a family. And I think something happened in those formative years because I spent a lot of time listening to the music that my grandparents were playing. Um, my mom would send me cassette tapes with her voice on it,
Hmm.
old Hindi songs. And I learned classical.
Acapella? Like acapella?
My mom would sing a cappella, like
Wow.
"Nanhi kali sone chali." That was a lullaby. It went "Hawa dheere aana." It was like these old Hindi songs on these cassette tapes. And then my grandparents were listening to these composers like R.D. Burman, S.D. Burman. My
Hmm.
parents were listening to them as well. They composed. R.D. Burman, S.D. Burman in India in the '60s and '70s were composing the soundtracks for all these for these films in India.
Uh-huh.
And film music in India is really the way that people get their music. It's not like here where it's radio and these pop songs. The pop songs and radio songs that are happening in India are coming from these films, from Bollywood, basically. So these composers, S.D. Burman, R.D. Burman, were the ones that I learned from, just listening to their compositions. And these are these like, it was, if I want to get deep for a second, like I hope I'm not boring anybody, but the music that they were writing was almost was the Indian interpretation of what was happening in the West, interestingly enough.
Okay.
So it almost sounded like this folk spaghetti Western kind of thing. It was what they thought Western music was, but interpreting it in their own way and then bringing Indian influences into it. This was like the 60s, 70s style of music. And these two composers literally taught me everything.
Wow. So what did you, so you never technically studied film or television composition. What did you study at Penn?
I was a history major.
History major.
And I was a history major, political science minor. I took a sitar class for one semester, and that was about it. But my main education in music at Penn came from my a cappella group. I was in an a cappella group called Off the Beat. Great name, right?
Great, perfect. I mean, everybody who went to college between like 87 and 94 was involved in a cappella in some way or another, right?
Yeah, or went to an a cappella show.
Yeah.
A cappella, they were, if not 1-2 degrees separated from a cappella.
Yeah.
But I laugh about it, but at the same time, Off the Beat is where I learned how to arrange music.
Right.
And music for 15, 20 people to sing. And that's how I learned to kind of orchestrate and write for multiple parts.
Oh, wow.
But I was a history major, so I didn't really study music. My music education really was listening to all these old Hindi songs. It was in my bands, and a cappella. Really
That's so. The whole process of kind of learning as you go. I mean, you obviously were steeped in music and the structure of music and the sonic landscape of music in all forms, but the kind of idea of learning how to compose literally on the job, right? It seems like that was kind of happening, and a lot of people want spoilers from This Is Us. They all want to know what happens. They all want to jump ahead in the story. And obviously you learned things in the order in which you were supposed to learn them. But was there something that you wished you had learned earlier that would have made everything easier? Like whether it's something technical or a way of recording or a logistics thing or anything. Is there anything like that?
I think for me, the main lessons I've learned from this process are things that I only learned after doing this for many, many years. And I think to that point, I guess if I'd known, it would take a very, very, very long time to kind of figure out what my musical path was going to be. That's one thing that sometimes I wish I had known that, but then there's other times where I was like, if I'd known that, would that have kind of scared me away?
Right. It's hard to wish things had been different when you appreciate and are grateful for where you are.
Exactly. And I think if I had known at that point when I started that it would take me years of kind of little failures to kind of, to have to overcome. And some of those failures are this, like, so my band, Gold Spot, I spent many years performing live in Los Angeles, around the country, and after many, many years of it, I finally got a little record deal with an independent record label, and then I got kind of bought out, they say, by like a major label. I was on Universal as an artist, and when I got signed to Universal, I still had to keep my day job in Los Angeles, which was working for AT&T Wireless, trying to put up like fake palm trees with the with the wireless antennas, so
Yeah.
so your cell coverage is good. I had
Yeah.
to keep that job because the deal that I got was just like minuscule for me and the band. We barely were able to pay our bills off that deal.
Yeah.
And then my record came out and it totally bombed. And it had like it was like it had been built up. There were nice things people were writing about in the press, but then ultimately when the record came out, it didn't really sell, right? And so I kind of, in a way, I failed there. I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve. I went through several of these experiences. That first job I got with Dan Fogelman scoring The Neighbors, the show was canceled right
Right.
after the year I completed that first job. So all these events could have been moments for me to kind of just call it and just say,
Yeah.
maybe I'm not meant to do this. Like my record failed, my first job in scoring didn't work out. The show got canceled. I could have easily stopped at any of those points. And that was just, I mean, there were multiple other times where I could have, but I kept going. And I think that was important. The main thing, if there was one other thing that I would say I wish I kind of knew early, it was to do what you can to find your own voice. There's something about, I think, in art in general. When I see an actor, when I see you, Chris, for example, perform, I genuinely believe watching you. I was a fan of yours before This Is Us. I mean, I saw you on Stranger Things, but there's something about the sound of you,
Mm.
or that is important to get out as an artist. And I see it in your performing. I feel like when I watch you on screen on This Is Us, for example, I genuinely believe that I'm seeing obviously the scripts. I'm seeing the work of the writers. I'm seeing all that, seeing the director, the editing, everything. But I'm also seeing you as an artist, where I'm believing that this is who you, Chris Sullivan, are as an artist, and that's a very powerful thing to feel as a viewer watching you, for example.
Mm.
And that's something for me. Took me a very long time to kind of come to terms with, to try to understand who I was as an artist.
Hmm.
And on This Is Us, for example, my artistry is it's informed by my childhood. It's informed by the Indian music I listened to as a kid.
So
All that.
yes, at the beginning of This Is Us, how many projects have you done with Dan?
I think probably four or five.
Okay.
A few of them were pilots, two series. So this might be the third series I've done with Dan.
And so at the beginning of This Is Us, what were the creative conversations that you guys had to maybe differentiate this from the other projects you'd worked on, or what were the initial conversations that went on, and have they changed season to season? Does he say, okay, we kind of leaned on this type of motif
Yeah.
season 3, let's try more of this season 4? What are those conversations like?
Well, as you know, with Dan, I'm curious to see how he's impacted your work as well. But for me particularly, Dan is always he gives me kind of like a clean slate. He sent me the script for the pilot, and at that point, I think it was called either the Untitled Dan Fogelman Project,
Yeah,
or
that's
it was
right.
called the 36. Was that what it was? Wasn't it called the 36 because like the big three were 36 years old or
Yeah,
something?
36. I think at some point somebody told me they were thinking I'd call the show Happy Birthday, and we
Oh
all
yeah,
threatened.
right. I'm so glad it's not called Happy Birthday.
Yeah.
This is Chris Sullivan, Emmy nominee from Happy Birthday. It just wouldn't work. You're Sid Khosla doing the music from Happy Birthday.
Oh, here's a funny, like when we did our first cast photo shoot together, off to the side was a rolling cart full of birthday themed props and like hats and streamers and things. And we were all like, what is that? And Milo told us, well, this, that, and the other thing. And Milo goes, don't any of you touch those props. No matter what anyone says, do not pick up one of those props.
So good. Well, where were we? Happy Birthday. This is Dan.
The conversations that you and Dan have about the tone.
He sent me the script for the pilot. I read it, and he was like, "Can you write a piece of music?" He's like, "Because you don't, there are other people kind of in the mix for this job. You don't have the job. I want you to read this and see what you can write." And it's an important show for. He's like, this is a very important show for me. The studio, the network, all are really kind of bullish about the show. They're excited about it. I'm excited about it. See what you can write. And at that point, you guys had already been filming the pilot.
Wow.
There was no composer attached at that point, and you were in the editorial phase.
Wow.
And so Dan gave me the script. I read it. I was living in New Jersey at the time, working out of my parents' basement, and I read the script, and I picked up my acoustic guitar, and immediately navigated. I immediately moved to something that was more organic. That's what I felt. I felt like the sound of the show needed to be organic. We were jumping in timelines from the '60s to the '70s to present to future potentially at that point. And I felt like if I'm going to create a musical palette for the show, it should be able to live in multiple timelines, and that would mean using instruments that will be around forever. The human
Right.
voice. So I sing on the score of the show. I used a wooden table to write all the percussion, to play all the percussion. I had my acoustic guitar. I used a $25 broken guitar that I got from a thrift store in Vermont near my in-laws.
Awesome.
I'm in Vermont right now, by the way.
Uh-huh.
We are quarantining here for a period before we see all our families on the East Coast. So it's fitting that we're having this conversation because I bought that guitar, I think, from maybe like 25 minutes away from here, and that became the sound of the show.
Wow.
And Dan loved it, and right away he said, "That's it. That works for me." And Glenn Picara and John Requa, who directed the pilot,
Right.
really liked it as well. And Ken Olin, who's our main director on the show, loved the sound as well. So that all that helped. That's what got me the job.
Where do you pull inspiration from outside of music?
Tough question. I think if I were to to answer that question honestly, I think it comes from this belief that I have that one day in all our lives we will live in a world where we're all treated equally, and I mean that you know with respect to kind of what we've been going through recently as a country, in terms of the recent issues we've had. They're not just recent, but long-term issues with race relations we've had. Um, for me personally, I saw my parents struggle when they came to this country to make a living, to achieve their goals based on their talents and their hard work. The one thing I've been able to control in my life is just making sure that I work as hard as I can. I try to be as talented as I possibly can. I don't know how that works, but I try to do the best I can. I think I'm motivated by this idea that ultimately your talent and hard work will help you achieve success in your life. And I know it's idealistic because there's other factors sometimes that go into play. There's luck, and I've also experienced my own sort of experiences in this business, not in terms of scoring these shows, but before, um, in terms of being seen as sort of an Indian American kind of pursuing a career in music in this country, and it's not the norm. It's not the thing you normally see. So I'm kind of motivated by this idea that ultimately, if you work hard, you try to be as talented as you can, you will achieve those goals. And I know it's idealistic because it's not the case. It's not always the case. So I'm motivated by this idea that one day we can all be treated by, we can all we can all be defined by our talents and our hard work and how we treat people. That's what I'm motivated
That's beautiful. What are we making art for if we can't be idealistic about it?
by. Right, right. This all still feels like a pipe dream.
Right.
I feel like it's going to be over tomorrow.
I got a couple of questions from people watching, and one of them kind of leads us right into one of the live performances that you pre-recorded. So, all the tech people watching, get ready to roll that tape. The question comes from somebody who's identified themselves as Upper West. It says, I'm curious if Siddhartha also produces, arranges, and records the music that he writes for the series and what the process is like. And unless you have anything to say about it, I think now's the perfect time for Hell of a Week. Is that
That's
right?
good. Yeah.
To kind of walk people through that process.
Do it.
Roll it.
In season 4, we had these back-to-back-to-back episodes where Randall, Kevin, and Kate are navigating through their own crisis. And here's the theme that I wrote for those 3 episodes called A Hell of a Week. And it's actually based on something I'd done earlier for Kevin in series. So enjoy.
So in that clip, are you all playing at the same time together, or is it to a click track? I mean, obviously, when you're not in quarantine, you're not recording in that fashion.
Yeah, so the way we recorded that was I laid down the piano first.
Ah,
I sent it over to the rest of the amazing players who played on it.
cool.
And that was something too. Like and I'm so glad we got to share that. Share that. We were hoping to do some live performances this summer, and
Yeah.
because of this pandemic that we're in, we were unable to do that. And I wanted to make sure that we found a way to still honor like the musicians and all the work that they do and perform on the score. And this was like we were excited about this, and they were excited about it, and it came out. I was so happy with how it came out. You know, they each. So I recorded the piano. I sent it to our cellist Ginger. She
Uh-huh.
recorded cello. Then that audio was sent to the next player, and everyone did their part and recorded themselves. And Alan DeMoss, who's my right hand in everything I do, he mixed and edited it all together so beautifully.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Thanks.
So when you're not collaborating on score type music, composition type music, you're also doing a good amount of songwriting for the show. And one of your biggest collaborators on the show has been Taylor Goldsmith.
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk about all of the songs that you guys have worked on together for the show, and what the difference is between that process and the composition process.
Yeah, so as we talked about before, you know, I started my career as a songwriter. It's kind of the first thing that I learned to do before score. And Dan Fogelman, who's known me since college, has seen that side of me. He'd come to my Gold Spot shows. You know, he was like one of 5 people that would come and see me perform. He would come and see these performances, and Dan asks me from time to time to write original songs for the show. So I've had the pleasure of writing these songs with friends of mine who I respect a lot. Like Chris Pierce and I wrote a song in season 1 called "We Can Always Come Back to This," and in season 3 and 4, Taylor and I got together to write some songs. Taylor is also Mandy Moore's husband, and I met Taylor at an Emmy, at a This Is Us Emmy event, I think a couple years ago, and we promised each other that we would find a way to work together one day. I was a huge fan, and I'm still a huge fan of his band Dawes, as you are as well.
Very
And
much.
we have that special connection because we've both worked with Taylor. You've worked with Taylor as well. Taylor has
Yeah.
written songs with you and produced songs with you for your own personal solo record.
Yeah.
And we know what a talent Taylor is. I think he's one of the I in my heart believe that he's one of the best lyricists of our time.
I agree. One of the greatest living American songwriters.
And he's brought. I was a huge fan of his song "From a Window Seat" from one of the earlier Dawes records. And when I met Taylor, I was just I couldn't believe I was actually hanging out with the guy from Dawes. I was blown
Right.
And then I couldn't believe that he agreed to actually work on some songs with me if the opportunity came up. And so finally, Dan had asked me last season to write a song called for Mandy, for her character Rebecca to sing in an episode, and I called Taylor, and he and I wrote a song called "Invisible Ink" together. And this season, we wrote a song called "Memorized" together, which premiered at the end of our first episode this season.
Right.
And
Baby Jack.
what's that?
They have performed by
Blake.
by Blake.
Yes, by Blake Stadnick, and Taylor and I have just a great chemistry together. He's such a great lyricist, and I think together, between sort of my melodic sense and his lyrical sensibility, we are able to come together and write songs pretty quickly. I hope that continues.
Yeah, I know. I know you spend a lot of time. I've been to your home studio, and I know a lot of times I see you, and you're like, I haven't seen another person for 6 hours. It's good to see you. That you spend a lot of time isolated, working on things, recording things. But
Yeah.
it also seems like it can be a very collaborative process, and I'm sure the quarantine has affected all of that,
Yeah.
making the majority of your work more isolated. What are you missing the most right now?
Um, I'm missing I'm missing just being able to come on set, see all of you guys working, because and when I get to do that, it inspires me to kind of come back to my studio and self isolate. I'm missing being around all the musicians that inspire me to do the work I do. Taylor is such a great collaborator in terms of songs we write. I miss being together with him and writing songs. Hopefully, we'll get to do that again soon. Um, and I mean, so much of my work on the show is sort of me at home, just kind of noodling and recording. To answer the other question from that someone had asked earlier, I record kind of a lot of the stuff on my own at home. There's a cellist named Ginger Murphy who is,
Mhm.
I think she creates like this little Bollywood orchestra on all these pieces for me, and she played on that. She played on that piece there. She's an incredible cellist. I miss seeing these musicians that kind of bring
Yeah.
this work to life.
Well, as we're running out of time, let's make sure we see the other performance. So if whoever's on the tech can get that ready, and then if anyone's watching, if you have any questions for Sid, send them on through, and we'll try to get to those after this last performance. So this next performance is called "At the Met." Take it
In the
away.
back half of season 4, we had an episode called New York, New York, New York, where we see the Pearsons go to New York over multiple timelines. And one of my favorite parts of this episode was this scene where you see little Rebecca at the Met looking at this painting. And we see this beautiful image throughout the episode. It inspired me to write this piece. It's called At the Met.
What can we expect this season, Sid? How will the music this season affect the stories that Dan is trying to tell? Do you get a heads up? Do you get more of a heads up than I do?
I don't know. I feel like you get more of a heads up than I do because
Okay.
Dan, we rarely talk about what's about to happen in season. When I ask him, he's like, "Don't worry about it. You'll find out." So I normally, I'm just kind of reacting to the scripts I get, to your incredible performances. That's it. I don't know
How
much.
much time do you get with the edited together picture before they expect you to have compositions returned to them ready to go on air?
Well, this is
On average.
So this is, and I say this with all due respect to Dan Fogelman. I love Dan. He's given me the gig of my life. So I will always, I will always say nice things about him. But Dan is somebody that loves to see stuff early, right? So he's and when he gets, once he sees the editor's cut. So after they've filmed, the editor puts together, as you know, puts together their version of the cut. What Dan sees at that moment has lasting impression on him more often than not. He trusts his team. I think that's where that comes from. He trusts his editors. He trusts the performances of his actors. He trusts the writing of the show. And at that point, what he sees is kind of it for him. Like there's modifications and changes that happen after. So I have to always get in really early.
Okay.
Because the music is part of that. So the editors and I work together really closely early on. So I have probably 3 or 4 days, honestly, to write and record and produce all the music for this show. Everything that happens after the 3 or 4 days is tweaking. It's minor. There's nothing big picture that happens after that point.
Our show has been labeled the emotional show, right? So we walk this. I feel like the writers do it.
Yeah.
I feel like I know I do it. And I'm curious to know if you do the same thing, where I am always trying to play against the sentimental nature of everything that we are involved in. Like, because it is so lovely, and the writing is not saccharine, and the music is not overly sentimental, and the performances are I believe pretty grounded. How do you walk that line?
I mean, I think in the same way you do. I mean, you've maybe cried on screen once in 4 seasons, I think, this last season. And my point is that you, just like with your performances, Chris, you are incredibly funny, incredibly, and you're funny, and you're dramatic in the right ways. That balance is the key. That's like with the reason why I think your performance particularly is effective is because you balance those so well. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to stay out of scenes when if we have these big monologues, I'm trying to stay out of them. I'm trying to when I see that and I see your performances and I see that writing, it's so strong on its own. It doesn't need me to be there. So I think part of the decision making in terms of how my thought process when I'm working on the show is figuring out when I need to actually be in there and when I don't need to be there, because that choice is important too.
Right. Your music always makes what is happening better. It cracks me open every time. And it's almost like I never expect it to come in. And then when it does, it's just like and it's
all you guys set the tone, you establish it.
It's all part of the same painting, right? And I can't objectively observe myself, but I can listen to your music, and I'm just very grateful for you as an artist. I'm very grateful for you as a friend.